Hi everyone, I'm Airier, and today we're going to check out the Fan with Too Much Time's next part of the Star Wars vs. Warhammer 40K. This is Soldiers of the Storm, the follow-on to They Came From a Planet Called War. We're getting Krieg stuff, baby. What does that mean? I mean, it's Krieg. It usually involves being obscenely brave and or possibly thinking, we must die for the Emperor to forgive us. I mean, that should be a joke, but that's actually literally the mentality, so yeah. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be over the top. It's going to be crazy and over the top, and considering some of the things I did in the last episode, literally falling over the top to lower levels, because that's their tactic. I mean, why jump down or walk when you can throw yourself into a barrel? You know, I was going to make a joke about throwing myself into a barrel and just go over the edge of a waterfall, but no, if the enemy was at the bottom, they would do that. Not even a joke at that point. It's just a statement of fact and tradition. Yeah, we're going to check it out. There's a link below to the original video. Hit it up. And when you're done, if you like this video, subscribe. And when I miss things, because yeah, let me know, because I actually do appreciate that. Let's get started. That's different. Why do we have chanting? SW verse 40K special. Is that Gregorian chant? I feel I should recognize it though. God damn! That is a lot of words, and honestly, this is probably the coolest drop I've seen yet for a name. Clones, Camino, Krieg, Replique, Battle of the Bloody Bridges, Part 2, Ave Imperator, for the Republic. Honestly, no, I like this intro style. It's confusing as F, but it looks really damn clean. And it covers just enough of the screen that doesn't look... Did I say the screen? Wow. The screen that it looks pretty good. I kind of like this intro. It just is really hard to read. It's like one of those word bundles. What is that? I should know this. I just don't. Okay. With special thanks to Hazo, Nazar, Too Much Mayo, really? And fans like, I missed the rest. Yeah, well, seriously, Too Much Mayo. That's BS. There's no such thing as too much mayo. There is mayo, and then there's everything else. There's no too much. It's always enough. Sometimes. I'm not going to talk about the times that don't exist, because they don't exist. And speaking of title drops, this one doesn't look bad. I just think it takes too little long. Personal take, I just like quicker cuts. The fuck is that? What audio was this?
Watched on from his position atop the turret gun of his command ATTE Walker.
Oh, so we're switching over to the Star Wars side of this battle.
The mass driver affording him a relatively advantageous view from his hill in the park. The trees, once vibrant, tall, and green, had been entirely cleared away, allowing for their artillery to be utterly unobstructed. What the clones saw through the...
Wait. What? This might just be me, but I thought the entire point of artillery was you just fire and you don't actually need to see the target to shoot it. Or do they mean obstructing the line of fire from their can? Okay, that makes more sense.
Enhanced sight of his electro-binoculars left him feeling conflicted. The Clone Wars had dragged on for almost 4 years, if not longer.
Is he not killed by
In that time, many Jedi had died, and many, many more clones besides. The Jedi generals who had performed the best had, by and large, encouraged the clones under their command to embrace their individuality, their creativity, and their cunning.
And it makes it easier to betray them at the end.
It was in this way that they had bested billions of droids and countless planetary militias, as well as separatists of all stripes. But even so, there had always been a line. A certain place they were not willing to go with organic fighters that they went to all the time when it came to fighting droids.
Oh, so I was right. He's actually having that little moral conundrum of, oh crap, these are biologicals. We're killing things that aren't droids. It's actually murder now. Huh. I kind of like that Fan is using this from a clone's perspective. If it was anything else, I would be like, okay, yeah, I've heard the story before. It's pretty cool. I'm fine with it. But here, beyond just the usual, okay, this is technically your first murder. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of clones who have done that, because not all of the separatist forces are droids. They do have biological forces in there. It's just mostly droids in some of the forces. I think some of the militias in the separatist army that aren't as mustache-twirlingly evil were actually fully biological as well. That's just more intelligence stuff that I've heard about, but don't entirely know, because I need to catch up on Clone Wars, which I've actually started finally. It's nice, though, to see a clone doing it, considering this is the thought process of, I don't think I like killing. Especially this. And again, I don't think he'll have any problem with it when he has to. It's just a thought process of, this is different. I'm not sure how to feel about it, that I wasn't expecting from a clone, considering, you know, their source, and they're literally there to do the murders. But they don't actually do that much murder. It's just an interesting choice. Huh.
It was a lack of honor, a denial of personhood, a malice and contempt that even the Jedi rarely tempered when they faced droids.
Oh?
But that was not happening here. Here, they were treating these invaders, these PS Imperials, just as they would treat a horde
Still
of
wondering if
B1s.
the PS theory is going to be accurate or not by the
even
end.
worse. The lieutenant watched as flashes lit up the far sides of the buildings, which the invaders were sheltering behind, knowing these to be the first 2 of the 3 planned ambushes.
Oh!
His AT-TE Walker.
One was in the building, the other one was firing down from the building. What was the third?
Were combining their firepower with advantageous positioning and the element of surprise to hammer the enemy in what they thought would be safe harbor. The 6-legged walkers timed their attacks with the sudden assaults of the squads 65 had sent to each of the ambush locations, hiding within the very buildings the imps would think to use for cover. Without the use of their best and heaviest armor, elements of the invading army his sniper tanks had seen neutralized first, the Imperial cultists stood no chance against the vicious crossfire they would be caught in. But
oh my god, sorry. This is actually a turn of phrase fan use that I don't think is in any way, shape, or form wrong. When he says the Imperial cultists, from his perspective, specifically the speaking clone, whose perspective everything is being filtered through, this makes perfect sense. Because they all think it's the PS, which was basically a cult, then went out, and is now coming back because it's human supremacy, basically. And honestly, I'm sure Palpatine will have some fun with that one. But more importantly, they think it's a cult in the derogatory sense of, oh, it's the cultist. What are they doing here? You don't use cult as a good term. The reason this is so funny is because he's accidentally completely right. Because the official religion is the Imperial cult of the Imperium. It is technically still a cult in the sense that their leaders, while they are replaced to make it a full religion, it is based around a godlike figure who has never died, so they still have the one leading entity. Yeah, there's actually a literal divide on how you classify religions, and having replaceable leaders is one of them, so that it can continue on beyond the death of a single leader. Technically, the Imperial Creed is a cult still because the first leader never fully died. So it could technically still qualify, even though it has lower level replacements of every other position under it. Yeah, it's weird. So technically it's still a cult, it's still accurate, and he's trying to say it accurately, and it's sad to think, and also a slightly derogatory way. But if an Imperial heard this, honestly, it sounds so weird to say Imperial when I'm talking about pre-Imperials in Star Wars. But details, I'm just not used to that for some reason. I don't know why. They just wouldn't think it's an insult because, yeah, that's the religion we got. What's up with that? It's context matters here. It's meant as an insult, but it doesn't come off as one because it's technically accurate.
But that was not all. Along with the assault squads to aid in their decimation, he had also sent his best marksmen out to neutralize their evident commanders. Headless, armless, and naked, the imps would be left without any options save for frantic advance or frantic retreat. The ambushes were scything through them, the losses for the imps reportedly growing massive in both of the initial attacks. The results of Master Ayla's plan were devastating. And that was good, because they needed to be. To say that 65 and his men were outnumbered by the attacking imps would not do justice to what the clones were facing.
Oh, that's actually a little surprising. I was under the impression from the previous episode that they had way more forces than I thought. I'm going back to it, and it's like, no, they didn't have that many. It just felt like it because the element of surprise made it seem so much more frantic. But now seeing it from the other side, I'm taking a second to go back and like, no, there were only the tanks on the walls and a few soldiers in the buildings. It wasn't a huge amount. It sounded like it though, because they took so much damage from the surprise. I guess, I'm wondering if that's a perspective thing or No, it has to be perspective that it seemed like more just because of how frantic the previous chapter was.
Even
Well
after
done.
enduring prolonged bombardment, the arriving enemy had 12 rifles for every blaster 65 had under his command.
Damn.
And drastic
That is a lot.
measures needed to be taken to even the odds if they were going to hold their position and continue.
I just realized why this is so insane. This isn't the main force of the Crimson Razors, which were already the smaller faction from the 40K universe. This is just the people they left behind. And it's already outnumbering so many. Like, I know this was not the largest Star Wars invasion force, but it's still a significant force, and they're already outnumbered by the people who were on the smaller end of the faction. I'm in a weird position where I want to ask just how crazy the battles later get when the main Imperial forces are brought to bear, but I also don't want to get spoilers. I want to know, but I don't want to know yet.
Continue aiding General Sakura in the main battle. Commander, said a voice through the comm.
Okay.
It was Vector, one of the marksmen turned assassins whom he had sent out to the first column. He and the other two had been instructed to choose high-altitude locations among their buildings, flag the enemy commanders, and then take out the one they thought was highest ranking.
Yeah.
Hard lessons from the Blue Massacre had revealed that Imperial forces were heavily reliant on their command chains and commanders in general.
Yeah.
Naturally,
basic troops aren't
removing them
nearly as trained
became as
sometimes.
much a priority as targeting the tactical droids. I got him. Enemy commander in the first column is dead, he said. A moment later, another voice mirrored the words, slighter this time. One of the tanks blew him away before I could get him, but yeah, enemy...
Oh, I think I remember this point. In the previous chapter, I think... So we're actually going back a bit in time, because when he's talking about sniping in the previous column, I thought we were after the ambush, but maybe we're not. We're actually stepping back before a little bit, because I think I remember when the previous main character was talking to someone and they just went quiet. They're seeing the sniper now from their side. Oh.
The commander in the second
Kinda cool how they're
column
intertwined, the
is
points together.
neutralized, said the clone marksman. Good, both of you get back here on the double. Let the assault squads withdraw at their own pace, he told the snipers.
Honestly, take out the leaders.
Yes,
It's the best
sir.
choice.
They said in unison. 65 waited a few seconds more before looking down at the small console on his wrist and contacting his third assassin who hadn't reported a kill yet.
Oh?
Catch, have you neutralized your target? 65 radioed. There was a pause, a silence. Not yet. Still looking for him, said Catch.
Because this
What's
is the
the
main
matter,
character
Catch?
who got out.
The commanders are typically not difficult to spot. I know, the marksman said. But I'm not seeing the typical signs. Don't worry, I'll find him. The attack on this...
Oh my god, They're actually bringing the regimental standards. I know why they do it, because honestly, a lot of the time their tech is... it's that weird middle ground of both super high-tech and powerful, and honestly, incredibly durable, and absolute garbage you'd find off some online web stores that I'm not going to name, but if you happen to know what wish.com is, I have no idea what that would be, but yeah. They have the standards, 1, because honor. 2, so you can actually see where you need to listen to and follow whenever everyone else is dead. I mean, it's actually not a bad tactic if no one's sniping you. If you're being sniped, it's literally a giant marker.
This calm hasn't even started yet. Oh wait, something's happening, said the clone sniper. Just focus on finding the commander and taking him out. You copy? 65
Honestly, even
said.
people with Vox scrolls
Yes,
that
sir,
they can see would be a good
said
choice.
Catch. 65 cut the link and then refocused his
Not as
attention
good
on
as
the
Commander,
ongoing
but still.
attacks, knowing that the third and final one would begin at any moment. It bothered him, but did not surprise him that the attacks had not been perfectly synchronized. The third column had traveled farther than the other two, and arrived later. To ensure maximum damage, the clones needed to give the Imperials time to cluster in the protective shadow of the building. The more
So we
tightly
are
packed,
backing up a bit
the
in time.
better.
Okay, good to
With
know.
their cover turned into a kill
And the
zone
third
and unable
ambush
to organize
is
a
the
defense,
tanks on the
the
wall.
imps would be left with only 2 choices. He had hoped they would choose to retreat and scatter.
Yeah.
But 65
We know that's
could
not gonna
already
happen,
see
but-
that both the second and first column were electing to charge desperately forward. Column 2 still had armored support, though it was rare, smoking and barely managing to plod along when it appeared on the opposite side of the bridge. Men clung to the armor and swarmed around it like green-clad rats. The turret of the tank, a Lehman Russ battle tank, according to the intelligence they had on the imps, was odd compared to the ones
probably just time
had seen
differentials.
before.
Yeah. They've had
Squat
previous contact.
and glowing a bright, radiating blue. The cannon flashed, a shining burst moving up from the base to the end of the barrel before discharging a tight, radiant lance of blue, hyper-accelerated plasma. The beams struck the center left of the fortifications across the bridge, instantly burning through them and through the ground and building, leaving a dripping circular hole through the entire structure. The gap was only...
Sorry, this is literally just geek fuel right now for me. I love giant lasers and all this crazy shit. So just hearing the description of it carving through the Star Wars structures is highlighting two things. One, so freaking cool! Two, buildings are just built to a different standard here. 40K buildings are basically all fortresses because the entire only war thing is a principle in a lot of building designs. And those who aren't usually don't last the multiple thousands of years until they get repairs. That's not always the case, but the fact that it can be the case is not actually an exaggeration is what you should tell you there. Counterpoint, Star Wars is a much more functional system of government even when the crazy-ass Sith were in charge. It's a very low bar and they managed to get over it. So they actually would repair things, but they're not building to the same level. So a single Lehman Russ is just tearing things apart. Hell, if they just point it down, they could probably start cutting buildings out, which honestly would be worse for the Imperials, which is probably why they're not doing it, because it might accidentally fall on them. Yeah, just I love this level of description, showing how their technology is interfering or interfacing with other things that aren't built to the same level of durability. It just is so freaking cool, man. Also, just giant laser. Just a fan of that.
Only 4 feet around, but anything even
did a great job on
close to
showing
it
this.
was emulated. And where before there had been a pristine line of barricades ready to be defended, now there was a hole.
A
and
single
then,
laser.
After a second discharge, another
laser,
hole
but...
soon after. 65 scowled.
Lasers.
Divert 25% of our current artillery capacity to the defense of the bridges, he told the officer who stood just below him, to his left. The commander gestured
Probably
with his
better
electro
take the bridges out when
binoculars.
they're on it, but
Focus fire on the tanks and vehicles. Yes, sir, said the
They probably
officer,
want them to
turning to
cluster around
relay
more
the
than they want to
specific
take out the
orders
bridge.
into his helmet comms. Several of the 3-legged sniper tanks turned away from the high-firing arcs they were using to aid Master Aayla Secura's assault, and brought both their mass driver cannons and their dorsal medium laser cannons to bear on the much closer and completely exposed targets charging across the bridge. The effects were decisive. The assaulting tank and many like it were suddenly rent into pieces by a volley of laser-grade blaster fire and ionized solid shells of Durasteel. The tank was...
Okay, this is more just my own question. Laser grade? I'm just kind of curious what that means in context for Star Wars. I'm not sure if that's just a thing fans using, but considering how often he does actually use legitimate things in universe, I'm assuming there's actually some kind of component to it. I thought most of what they were doing was just lasers, but saying laser grade when referencing a sniper tank seems to imply that it's much higher than what they're normally using. This is probably just me not knowing enough about Star Wars, so if anyone could fill me in, I'd actually appreciate it.
With the plasma weapon in particular, sparked and seemed to suck in the air around it as it rattled and fell to pieces before detonating in a sudden, deafeningly loud explosion. The imps near the tank became sprays of senseless flesh bound within armor,
They rolled a
bursting
6,
like children's
it
water
went boom.
balloons against the onrushing palm of the concrete-like compression wave. The murderous air was, itself, running ahead of something far more lethal. An expanding corona of heat and energy which atomized all it touched, blackening blood, and shearing away the armor of uniforms before the remains contained within them could even touch the ground.
It's absolutely
When the
destructive and
rising,
terrifying.
electrically charged
Standard stuff for
mushroom
the
cloud had
Imperium.
been cleared away, it revealed a new chasm almost twice as wide as the tank itself had been, leaving a large gap near the center of the bridge surrounded by molten
the bridge is still standing up?
superheated metal.
God damn.
65 braced himself as the shock
I mean, I know I went on a little tangent earlier about how Star Wars wasn't built to the same level of durability as 40K, but apparently that's still a very durable level because they just survived taking out 2 Lehman Russes worth, and that would be 2 Lehman Russes radius. Oh no, it'd be double, so that'd be the diameter, but that's circular, so ooh, that is a large space. It can survive the diameter of double the Russ, just taken out of the bridge, and it's still not even talked about falling. Dude, that's actually very impressive.
Waves from the distant blast rolled over him, his helmet shaking slightly. When he raised his head to view the scene once more, he was shocked. Not by the power of the explosion or the damage it had caused. It was the Imperials that shocked him, not the tank at all.
Just ignored it?
The imps of the second column, despite an enormous amount of their forces having been devoured by the blast, were still trying to follow through on the assault. Hugging the sides of the bridge, burning boots and feet on cooling, glowing metal, they made their way around the superheated area which surrounded the hole. The clone sighed heavily, realizing with no small amount of annoyance that the cultists would not be turned back. Fine, then he and his men would force them back. He turned to his right, looking down at the officer standing nearby, ready to take his commands.
Probably Cadian.
Have the defense task force split into 2 groups and line up along our barricades on the first and second approach. Pick out enemy commanders where possible, and once they have reached a quarter of the way across, open fire and keep it coming. Have the flame company move into cover behind the defenders and wait for further orders. The officer nodded, wordlessly looking away before raising his hand to his helmet as he began relaying the orders. 65 turned back and watched the mass of varied clone troopers who stood before the tanks begin to march into position. White and yellow armor gleaming in the fading sun, the distant clouds having not dimmed it enough to hide the splendor of the Gar's finest.
Okay, there's something going on right now that fans showing through how he's describing things. In the previous chapter, when we were in the head of the main character from the 40K side, we got a much more crazy, chaotic, depressed, in the sense that he didn't think he was good enough, but it's like, oh, so if you agree, the Commissar, I die. Oh, don't worry, I'm good enough. That entire thing. It never felt like they were an overwhelming force. It felt like they were beaten down and bludgeoned and just pushing through with main grit and determination, which they were. Here, though, from the Star Wars side, it's way more clinical. This is a very calm, thoughtful person. The clone is thinking it through. They're thinking of the philosophical implications. They're considering the tactics, making changes based on how things are reacting. This is someone who doesn't feel. It's not showing us the same kind of, how to put it, grit that the previous chapter had, because we're going from someone who's been in the muck and feels that they're still in the muck to someone who feels like this is dirtier than they're used to. And it comes across in the precision and the calculation. It's a much colder personality. And I like seeing that determination between the Imperial versus the clone. And it's a good way to differentiate the two. Even though we're going into the same battle, it's being described very differently. And that's just a really good way to do it. Mostly I'm highlighting that, though, because one of the things people do when they really fuck up rewriting a scene from a different perspective is that it sounds the exact same way. So many times I'll read something, it's like, hey, here's one perspective on this scene. And then there's another perspective, but it's the same goddamn writing. It's like, oh, yeah, I'm writing from this person's perspective, but he also saw the same thing. So I'm going to just say it's the same thing. Yeah, it's good. Here, we're not focusing on the people fighting. We're focusing on the overall picture, which this guy would have, who the previous guy didn't, because he was focusing on the people and his involvement, where this guy is focusing on also his involvement, but his involvement is logistical. It's setting it up. It's organizing the overall command. I like this because we're seeing the other side of the battle from the Star Wars side, but also the other side in the sense that it's the broader picture as opposed to the smaller picture. We're getting a different battle that happens to cover the same area. That's well done. Good on you, fan, for doing that, because again, very easy to fuck up. So many times I've seen it. It's absolutely infuriating when you see it. And here, it's working well.
The troopers moved a short distance to the barricades, strong fortifications made of ferrocrete reinforced with durasteel, some of the central patches even being ray-shielded as well. The clones filled the spaces within and behind, weapons bristling from around and over the walls and shelters of the barricades as orders were barked, sergeants and officers clarifying priorities to eager troopers. 65 refocused on the imps, judging that the first column would reach the quarter mark before the second. Focusing his sight there, he could see the screaming, rabid ranks of the Imperial forces as they charged across the cleared bridge. They moved in disorganized mobs, shooting as they ran, some
sounds
more
like 'em.
accurately than others, all either unaware or unmindful of the kill zone they were running into. A few of the Imperial soldiers carried flags, others bore swords or wore enormous, sparking gauntlets, and 65 saw more than a few chainsaws raised into the air, belching
also
black
wearing
smoke as
chainsaws.
their many
Catch that.
teeth whirred and
Because they wouldn't know
spun.
his chain sword yet.
He was looking at a horde of madmen, and
Yeah.
felt very little remorse
Accurate.
in that moment as he watched his troopers open fire. The result was a near literal wall of blue bolts, and when it met the ragged first and second ranks of the charging imps, they reacted appropriately.
And died.
Men were thrown off their feet, flesh burning and melting as flak armor was burst open, scattering shards.
Wait. They were thrown off their feet. I can understand falling because they're dying or things exploding on them, like the flak armor he mentioned, but do Star Wars blasters carry mass for an impact? I thought they were more burning. I don't know. Maybe it's just an interaction with the flak armor. I thought that I thought of it this way, but I don't actually think that I thought that. Maybe I should think about some more. Basically, what I'm asking is, do they have mass in what I thought were light-based weaponry? I don't actually know. I know someone talked about how larger aspects of Star Wars weaponry were not entirely laser-based, but more esoteric. Let's go with that word. So if anyone knows, I'm just kind of curious about that as well.
Yards of shrapnel. Warriors in carapace armor staggered through the first, second, and third
Hey, if
volleys,
you actually have the
but
armor, it
began
works well.
falling in mass as they were boiled alive inside their shells of ceramite.
Not a good way to go.
Additionally, with 100
Oh, they know
shots per
ceramite now.
blaster pack, it would be a good while before any of 65's men would need to cease fire to reload.
Oh.
The Imperials tried to fire back, running
I've
and
never seen
gunning,
a gun
but the
reload in Star
majority
Wars.
of their shots were horrendously
Out
inaccurate,
of the games.
regardless of the weapon they were attempting to use, and the fortifications stood against nearly all of the returning fire that managed.
Uh-huh. See, when we were on the Star Wars side, or sorry, not Star Wars, the Imperial side, they're just clones still, not stormtroopers. When we were on the Star Wars side, it didn't seem like they were firing badly. It almost sounded like they were firing, put all the guns into it and charge. And from this side, though, from someone who's not in the thick of it, again, it's going back to that colder personality, talking about how they're missing, they're inaccurate, they're just kind of spraying wildly without actually hitting their targets, and the barricades are doing fine because of that. I like this. It's showing how ragged that command really is. And considering we know that they survive and pull through this ambush, it does show just the sheer level of what the fuck, I'm not gonna die, ha 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 ha, that the Imperial side really does have right now.
To connect. It was not long before the imps of the first column began to break, falling to fear as comrades and commanders alike fell all around them. Some began to rout, and that trickle of terror was swelling into a cascade. Feeling satisfied with the work being done there, the commander moved his sight to the troops of the second column, who were just about to cross the quarter mark.
Oh?
Where the imps of the first column had been made up of bands of 6 or more soldiers, all in various uniforms and heraldries, these newcomers from the second column were the opposite. Running far apart from each other, heads down as they charged, these men wore uniforms colored green and tan and seemed to
Now we got the
understand
Cadias,
that by staying further apart,
actually are
they made
decent
themselves
soldiers.
less susceptible to the focused fire which had been devouring the squads on the other bridge.
Oh.
Occasionally, scattered troops in distant groups of 10 would stop, kneel, and open fire, covering the charge of the men rushing past them
Kneel
until
for
they
support of the
themselves
weapon?
were shot, or until so many others had passed their kneeling positions that their visibility had become less than acceptable.
so they're hiding
65
behind other
found
bodies.
himself feeling relieved that he had taken the precaution of ordering the other clones to clear the bridges of anything that could be used as cover, as these soldiers would certainly have turned any such havens into hard points to contest.
Yeah.
But there was no cover, and these bridges
Kill
averaged
zone.
a stretch which spanned a little more than half a kilometer. The losses these men took as they crossed into the kill
Planetary
zone of
building,
the
man.
bridge were still hideous to behold. To their credit, they did not rout, even though groups and individuals did stumble or hesitate in the face of the certain death which they now ran towards, and which often found them moments later. And their aim was precise enough that those who stopped to shoot quickly made themselves valued targets.
Now, this is interesting. So we saw the first group that was more just a mishmash of regiments put together, which is honestly pretty standard for the Imperium. You don't stop serving, you just survive until the next campaign and get thrown in with whoever else did. Because you're in the guard, you just keep fighting. I'm not sure if that was always the case, but I think at this time period it was, just because I don't think the Indominus Crusade changed that. Also, this isn't the Indominus Crusade, this is during the Indominus time period, I think during it, sometime, not sure at what point, when it was the survivors, so they're all kind of mishmash regardless. But here we have a full solid regiment of actual trained troops who are working together, as opposed to the people who are mishmashed together. And he's already talking about the difference, that they're just accurate enough. He's not saying that they're more accurate, that they're accurate enough to make it actually work. It's a small little difference, but it sounds like he's saying that these are people who could actually shoot. He's not equivocating them, or not equivocating, equaling them to his own skill and proficiency as a clone, which, I mean, frankly, even in the Star Wars first movie, New Hope, the Imperial Stormtroopers had decent accuracy, and Stormtroopers were inferior to clones. I've been told. I haven't done the math myself, because honestly, I suck at math. I'm not going to do that. I know pain when I hear it. I'm not doing that.
Targets. These Imperials scuffed the forces defending the barricades, wounding some and killing one or two, but ultimately failing to shake the defenders in any way or make any significant headway.
I wonder if we're going to see this.
And yet still they came
charge.
on. Soon, mounds of the dead began to pile up, tripping up advancing cultists with their own screaming wounded and silent fallen. Some even began to use the thicker patches of corpses as cover, laying behind them and
that's
firing.
morbid, but
By
accurate.
the many moons, the imps from the second column were creating artificial barricades from the bodies, a display which was nearly as sickening as it was proving effective, the mounds of corpses successfully holding against the blue rain of death. Then, suddenly, "Commander, I'm sorry,"
What?
came a voice over his comm set. 65's heads-up display showed him from where the message was coming from. The fact that it had come unbidden already told him it was a priority one message. A glance at the name had him refocusing his electro-binoculars to the as-yet empty third bridge.
And this is where the previous character was, so they're talking about this one. Okay, so that's the time period. We're literally right before the ambush of the previous chapter happened. Okay.
He saw nothing. No signs of continuing fire, nor any Imperials charging down the avenue. He would have thought that meant they had retreated, but from the sound of Gaff's voice, he highly doubted it. "What's happening, Gaff? What's your status?"
Dead.
he asked. There was a brief pause, and 65 almost repeated himself before Gaff began speaking again.
Oh, he's not dead yet.
"They charged the building, sir. Overran us at the lip. We made them pay badly for it, sir. Real bad. But we were forced to give way. They forced their way into the Stratos Central Mall and began isolating us." 65 felt ice spike his veins. "Are you cut off? Why didn't you withdraw as planned?"
They went really fast. Also, if they're in a good ambush point, that means that there's now... the Imperials are in a very good defensible position to start laying down covering fire on and turn this ambush against the opponent. Neat.
He yelled into his comm. "I'm sorry, sir. I thought we could double around, hit them with a surprise countercharge, maybe buy Catch enough time to kill their commander. But it...
I mean, to be fair, they tried very hard, and they nearly succeeded.
But we are not cut off. We are withdrawing down the sub-access tunnels, same way we came. We should be with you in a little while. We have a lot of wounded, Commander." 65 sighed heavily, but nodded his head in a gesture of acceptance. "Copy that, Gaff. Just finish getting your men out of there. As soon as you're clear, we're going to level that entire structure with the sniper tanks, so don't take too long. Tell Catch to go ahead of the others. I want him here in case Catch is dead, sir."
taking out the structure is a viable
Gaff
way.
said, cutting his commander off. The clone felt the world become a little less real. Catch had been his pod brother. They had survived Geonosis. "Are you sure, Captain?" Can't just live through a lot worse than these imps can put out.
Well, to be
65
fair, they could also put
insisted,
out worse,
teeth
too.
Clenched. I'm sorry, Commander. Him and his whole squad, the clone began. Are you sure, Captain Gaff? Are you 100% sure? The commander demanded. 65, he was decapitated.
Oh, goddamn. We're literally seeing the exact opposite character development, aren't we? In the previous one, it was an unsure character growing into a role over the course of the story. Here, though, we're seeing a sure character breaking down because of outside forces, where his plan is breaking and his, I guess, the equivalent of the family member, because they're technically all brothers, but details, his pod brother is dying. And you can already hear he's getting more frantic and angry, and hearing this and knowing it's bad news, we're literally watching him break down while the other guy's building up. Oh, that's inverse character progression. That's so neat. Sorry, it's just, I like things that loop around like this because you could show the juxtaposition. I already mentioned that in the storytelling and the aspects already, and now we're seeing it in character progression as well internally.
Gaff blurted. A silence hung between them then, the only sounds being those of movement on Gaff's end and those of battle on 65's. Understood. Get back here, Gaff, and let me know the instant that you and your men are clear of Strato Central Mall. Do you understand?
So
Commander, look! Space Marines! The officer to his left shouted.
Oh, they actually got
pointing
Marines!
With his hand. The commander felt his heart stutter, felt the earlier chill return with nearly twice the force, running through.
Wait, they actually have Marines? Sorry, just this is going to be the first fight we actually see, because all the previous ones were either one-sided jokes, were just demonstrating that Davik Thune is a badass who could play with droids to take them out in one fell sweep. And I'm using the word play intentionally because he probably could have just slaughtered them immediately at his skill level. But he actually made them all line up so he could take them out in one stroke, which is the equivalent of just saying, I got nothing stopping me from earning style points. Yeah. Or the previous earliest fight with Space Marines when it was just like the monsters in the dark and the screen was darkened appropriately as well to show that we have no idea what's going on and it's terrifying. It did build it up pretty well that way. But now if we're actually going to get to see Space Marines fight, we haven't seen that. The most we've seen is literally just a couple things. No actual full-on combat yet.
Threw him like a missed step in the dark. He cut the channel and raised his electric binoculars, aiming them in the direction indicated towards the first column. There they were, over 20 of them, with more appearing by the moment. They had just broken the front.
Oh, so they're misidentifying Ogrins as Space Marines, aren't they? I'm assuming if he actually wanted to use a Space Marine image, he could find plenty because that's the biggest art. Finding an Ogrin with full armor and a rebreather might be hard to find. Also, I just realized that's an Ogrin-sized grenade. That is terrifying.
Ranks and were striding forward, hefting massive metal shields before them that were absorbing the firepower being put out by the troopers without difficulty. 65 blinked.
They are
he had seen hollows of the Space Marine which General Skywalker had fought, and that thing had not been as large as these, and it had been encased fully in armor to the point of seeming like a machine, unlike these clearly organic, gigantic men. Those details barely mattered, however, as an artillery shell sailed into the rightmost shield-bearing warrior. The metal dented, and the giant Imperial staggered, but held firm as the shot rebounded away, striking the bridge to his left.
Goddamn!
This scene repeated itself as more and more artillery fire was directed at them.
Ogrins with shields, man.
Rebounding off the impossibly thick shields. How, by the many moons, could men be strong enough to do anything like that? Without speaking, 65 reached down to his belt and withdrew a detonator. It was little more than a thin metal tube with
so they were going to blow the bridge
on one side and an antenna on the other. But linked to this small thing were the 4 baradium charges his men had secured to the bottom of the first bridge. Just a single flake of the stuff could power a thermal detonator. The baradium charges they were planning on using had much more than that.
So they're not just taking chances on blowing the bridge, they're blowing everything on it at the same time.
Orders, but he had hoped he would not be forced to use them.
Why?
One of the huge warriors fell, and then another, but they were not dying fast enough, their shields not failing quickly enough. The soldiers around them were rallying, the tide of the rout turning even as the clones frenzied to take out those they could before the imps could get too close. The lesser cultists hid behind the shields of the larger ones,
Yeah,
and soon
makes sense.
they were past the halfway point and drawing closer and closer. PLX missile launchers were deployed, killing another 2 more of the giants, but many more were left. And the imp soldiers who had made it with them had come too far to surrender now.
Okay, something I need to say just because it's absolutely hilarious to me. Fan's already done this once before. He's building up the Space Marine. He's building up the Space Marine librarians by showing something that we, as players and people aware of 40K, would think of as lesser. Ogryns are tough. But you don't expect an Ogryn to run into a Space Marine who probably has better swords and weapons and one-on-one each other. Honestly, they're durable as enough that they might actually hold out, but I don't think they're nearly as strong. I don't think their stats are that high. Or they might be. Just not as good weapons. It's a very powerful unit where it's used well. By that I mean Ogryns. But they're not nearly as strong as Space Marines. So the fact that they initially identified the Space Marines and then they lowered expectations to Ogryns, and then they're building it back up again. Well, I should be saying fan instead of they are, but whatever. This is going to build up how strong a Space Marine is later by showing what an admittedly lower level opponent would be here. And honestly, if we had seen this from the 40K side, it would not work. Because we would have someone with foreknowledge of what could happen. It was like, okay, this is how strong they are. How are they going to do against the enemy? Ooh, they did well. Nice. Of course, it'd be way more distracted and drastic and way more engaging, like the survival, yeah, aspect. But from this side, from the Star Wars side, without the foreknowledge of just how powerful one side is, we see them immediately assuming this based on size, and it's bigger, it's wrong. We're showing how big this is to build up. We've already done this before by showing how big one Psyker, one Primaris, specifically the Primaris human, not the Primaris Space Marine. I know they reused the word, it annoys me still. How strong that was by comparison. We can also infer that a Space Marine librarian is going to be way more nuts. They're doing the same thing here, just with basic Space Marines. And even though we saw in the shadows how strong they were when they tore through everything, including Jedi, we didn't see them fight. And we're still not seeing them fight. We're just seeing how big something lesser than them is as a threat. So that pedestal of what that fight is going to look like is just being raised a little bit higher.
Crossed the 3/4 mark, charging and screaming all the while. 65 felt his stomach twisting, but reasserted his discipline. Order the men on the first bridge to pull back, away from the barricades. They have 15 seconds to seek further cover.
Boom.
He told the officer to his right, his voice clipped and rushed, even more so than normal. The clone nodded and did not even turn to the side as he began to hurriedly relay the orders into his helmet comm. The fire coming from the barricades on the first 2 bridges ended abruptly, and the clones stationed there began to vault and leap back from the barricades, pulling comrades and equipment with them before ducking to the ground and covering their heads. 65 waited for the last possible moment when he saw all the clones escape the blast radius before he pressed his thumb down against the firm button of the detonator. It almost seemed to resist the pressure of his digit before sinking into the handle. The charges detonated in a row.
So I'm cutting this one here because moving on, I think this is a really good point to stop. Just because giant explosion, and I can come back in the high point. Get it? Because it's blown sky. Hi. Yeah. Sorry, I was thinking about that pun for a while. I was trying to find a place to use it. I'm using it here. Yeah, is it a good point? No, I'm doing it anyways. More importantly, though, I feel like this is the moment where things are going to go absolutely, I think the term is pear-shaped on the Star Wars side. We're going to watch the main character here break. Because it's already been shown, we've talked about the inverse build-up to the teardown of this character. And I want to see this because Krieg is going to scar him. And I really want to focus on that. Also, because I'm late to do adulting stuff and I didn't realize, oh God, it's 5:30. I was supposed to be somewhere half an hour ago. That's on me. I enjoy this, and hopefully I survive being late to do the thing. Oh, I am so screwed. More importantly, I need to go. So if you haven't already, there's a link below to the original video. Hit it up. And if you like this, subscribe. Let me know anything I missed. Obvious reasons. And I'll see you guys in the next one if I didn't make my wife wait too long. Oh, I'm in trouble. So yeah, I'll see you guys later. Adios.